welcome to our final Teatime Talkback for our Reconceiving Family reading series featuring Made in India by Satinder Chohan. I am thrilled to be joined today by the playwright, director, actors, and stage directions reader to talk a little bit more about this reading and about the play. I'm Claire Moyer. I'm the Associate Director and Literary Manager for Inishnua. Before we get started, we need to give a big thank you to our reading series sponsors, Jefferson University. They have made this possible, especially as we venture into the new world of virtual theater. So we're really, really grateful to them. We will be taking questions from the audience, which I know we can't see, but we know you all are there, so thank you for joining us. If you have a question along the way, please feel free to submit it in the Q&A option at the bottom. You'll see there's a little icon. I'll get the question and I will ask the panelists. If for some reason you would like to ask the question yourself, which you're more than welcome to, you can send me a message saying you'd like to ask it, and we can also unmute it if you are feeling adventurous. So just let me know as we go, and I'll keep an eye on the Q&A at the bottom. So before we get started talking specifically about the play, I wanted to ask each of the artists involved to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their connection to this piece, and anything else that people might want to might need to know about them, whatever they feel like volunteering. So I'm going to go around the screen as I see things, and I'll call on people if that's okay, and then we'll get started on some questions. So why don't we start with Satinder?
Hi, I'm Satinder Chohan, and I'm the writer of Made in India. I'm actually zooming from lockdown London, England, and I come from a very small Punjabi town called Southall, which is in West London. And Southall is it's an immigrant enclave which really inspires and infuses a lot of my work. So I like focusing on the sort of, you know, the global, local and global migrant workers of the world. And Made in India is one such story that I wrote about them.
Awesome, thanks. Thank you for joining us. We keep discussing how, you know, as frustrating it is to not be able to do theater in person. One of the silver linings in all of this is that for our reading series, we've been able to have playwrights join us. So that's been really special, and we're really glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a really pleasure.
Priyanka.
Hi, I'm Priyanka Shetty. I am an actor, playwright, and director. I'm originally from India, and I moved to Philly about 3 months ago, but I've been in the US for about 5 years. And I was really excited to work on this piece because it is set in India, and it has 3 strong female protagonists, and it's so beautifully written. So I feel very welcome into the Philly theater community, and it's such an honor to work with the team at Inishnua and the beautiful, beautiful cast that you all got to see in this reading. So grateful for this opportunity and very grateful to be a part of this talkback too. So thank you.
Thanks for being here, and we are really excited to have you in Philly theater as well.
Thank you so much.
Rue.
Hi, my name is Rupal Pujara. I live in Philadelphia. My family is from Gujarat in India. So I was very superbly excited. My family, I think, is more excited than I am because they're finally like, you can speak Gujarati, great. Now we support your career, you know, like. So I'm an actor, singer, performer living in Philly. I did a lot of work in the UK as a singer, and I was so excited to do this play. I came across that in 2017, I think, when the artistic director of Tamasha Theatre Company from the UK did a play in Philadelphia. And I was like, oh, I really enjoyed his play. So I was researching his theater company, and I came across this, and I just thought, what an amazing play. I hope to be able to read it and be a part of it. And here we are a few years later. So I'm just so excited to really.
That's amazing. I didn't know that you had a previous relationship with this script. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Suli.
Hi, I'm Suli Holum. I'm Philly-based as well, theater artist, actor, director, playwright. And this is my second time working with Inishnu. I did a reading, I think last season or season before. I was really thrilled by this process, getting to meet three brand new, to me, theater artists who are all spectacular. I've actually already hooked Priyanka into my next project. So thank you, Inishnu, for making that connection for me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, the play, I am, in addition to being a theater artist, a mother. And really, really focused on telling women's stories. And I was really grateful for the opportunity to work on this play, which is really potent and powerful piece.
Thanks. Yeah, Suli, you were in the reading of The Effect. I think it was about this time 2 years ago that Casey McMillan directed. Yeah, that's a very cool play. Awesome. Dipti.
Hi everybody, my name is Dipti Mehta and I am a playwright and performer. Originally from India, right now happen to be in India. So exciting times, middle of my night. But I'm just so grateful to have been part of this amazing play. The first theater that I ever did at the age of 6 was in Gujarati. And the first few programming things that I did for the All India Radio were in Gujarati. And then I was doing stuff in Hindi or English and never in Gujarati. So to come back to Gujarati was kind of like a gift in itself. And, I'm just really grateful to have worked with everybody on this project. Everybody is so wonderful. And, already people have been saying about the cast. So I second that too. Like, it's so amazing to see Suli and Rupal, both of you are fantastic. To work with Priyanka and the entire team, and I just know it was just such a great experience. So thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you, and thank you for joining us from India. I didn't realize when we were setting this all up that you would be zooming in from a very different time zone. So thank you for making the time for this.
Happy to do so.
And Madison.
Hi, I'm Madison Klaus. I'm based in Philly. I am an actor and director, and I did the voiceover for the stage directions for this piece. I also had the opportunity to intern with Inishnu this spring as we transitioned into our lockdown into this brave new world. But yeah, I was very excited to come back and work on this. It was a great experience.
Thanks, Madison. Yeah, Madison was one of our 2 amazing interns last season and was actually part of the initial conversations around this reading series. And I believe Madison was the one who came up with the name for the reading series, Reconceiving Family, because we were like starting families, beginning families, having babies, what do we call this? And she's a lot cleverer and came up with that. So when we were talking about bringing someone in to do stage directions, it made a lot of sense to reconnect and bring you back in and to be able to have you be part of the process on this end as well, since also your internship was cut unnecessarily short by, everything that we're all going through. So we're glad to have you back, Madison. All right, so we're gonna dive in with some questions. So I'm gonna start with Satinder. And I wanted to learn a little bit about your background in journalism. I know this because I read some interviews with you online and doing research. And I was just interested if you could talk a little bit about how that both affects your playwriting and how you transitioned into playwriting from that.
I actually graduated. I was in the States for a year. I did my MA in the States for a year at Yale Graduate School. And it was when I came back to England that I got into journalism, and I ended up editing an British Asian arts and culture magazine called Second Generation, which really captured that Asian cool scene which was emerging at the time. And it was really about a young British Asian generation really finding the confidence and sort of swagger to express their dual identities of being British and Asian through music, through art, through fashion. So that was the first magazine that I edited, and then I edited another magazine for women of color. And I was freelancing for a little while. And I then ended up becoming a documentary film researcher. But my ultimate goal was always to write creatively. I just never had the confidence to do it. I never had the confidence nor the background. I'm from an immigrant working class background in England. My parents are, you know, my father worked in a factory, in a Quaker Oats factory. My mother worked in a hospital laundry. I had absolutely no connections to theatre whatsoever. So it was a really sort of circuitous route to find, to really express my sort of writing passions. And it was while I was working on an episode of the BBC's Who Do You Think You Are? And I think you have that in the States, don't you? Yeah. You do, yeah. And I was working on an episode which was exploring the family history of an actress, and amazing, brilliant actress over here. And she's a writer as well, multi-talented, called Meera Syal. I don't know if you guys know of Meera Syal. And I was in Punjab, which is my ancestral home. My parents, my grandparents are from Punjab, and I was researching her family history in Punjab for a month. And I mean, I love documentary research, but while I was there, I basically came across, it was funny because it was my first trip to India by myself. And I went with these very romantic notions of Punjab that I had grown up with, you know, the sort of lush and golden, verdant fields of Punjab. And when I got there, I actually found out about a huge spate of farmer suicides that had happened there as a consequence of corporate and chemical farming. And it had wreaked sort of severe ecological and environmental destruction across the land. And it was quite emotional going back to my father's village and my mother's village and sort of really seeing firsthand the kind of consequences of what was going on. It wasn't just Punjab as well, it was sort of happening all over different states around India. And I just remember coming back from that trip, and it was an incredible work trip, but I remember coming back just feeling really compelled to write this story that really connected to me emotionally and politically as well. And I just put pen to paper and I started writing a short play. I have no idea why it was theatre or why it was a play, because I had zero background in it. And it was about a Punjabi cotton farmer. And I ended up submitting the short play to a fantastic Asian women theatres company here called Kali Theatre. And eventually that play, Zameen, became my first production, and it toured around the UK. And, you know, and I sort of discovered, I did the thing that I never had the confidence to do because I had been so impassioned by this sort of this very, very tragic spate of happenings in Punjab, and just really tapped into the reason why I felt so driven to write. And yeah, that was the reason. And I transitioned into playwriting after that. And I feel that journalism and documentary research have really fed into the way that I choose the stories that I want to write about. I want to write about real life characters. I want to write about sort of real life incidents, you know, creatively and non-naturalistically if I can, increasingly. But, you know, it is about a local and global underclass that I really, really connect to through my hometown, through my background. And journalism has really kind of given me the tools to try to approach that with a degree of impartiality and objectivity, which was interesting for Made in India, because I felt like I did have very strong opinions about where I stood. And I think it's really important as playwrights that we do maintain a degree of impartiality, and I've got to learn to do that better. But also the documentary research has been so useful in terms of the process, the creative process that I now engage in. And research is a fundamental part of the way that I put my work together, and I like to spend a lot of time sort of losing myself and trying to make the creative connections between the things that emerge during that particular stage before I begin writing. And sometimes I get lost in it a little bit too much, but I really like to indulge myself and love that stage. So yeah, so they've really fed in. It's felt like it's been an organic process. It was a long, because I didn't start writing until my early 30s, I think. But you know, it's been incrementally. I've got more confident. I've been, you know, I've sort of learned to develop my craft and my voice much more. So for any people out there, any women out there, like, persevere, stay at it, because I never thought that I could do it, even though I dreamt of doing it. And you know, now I feel much more confident about it, even though I've still got so much to learn.
I feel like that's a very interesting balance of, and this plays a really great example, right? Of there's clearly so much substance behind it, and so much research and factual information, but then you're able to hone in on these like 3 individuals and the reasons they're in the room and their motivations for being there, and finding that balance between the data mining that you're sort of talking about, and that gathering of information, and then distilling that into stories and characters that we can emotionally connect with, is a really impressive balancing act that you found in this piece.
Thanks. Yeah, and exactly. And I think that's really what it's about, is that, you know, I think in those early drafts, I think there's always that danger that things are too factually presented, and you have to find the sort of creative life within the real characters and the real worlds that exist, and you have to give them a life of their own and sort of let them kind of fly into the story. And that's a process. It's just a process, and it's almost like you do have to start with the kind of those initial tools of what is this real life situation. So with surrogacy, who are the surrogates, and who are the women who hire the surrogates, and who are the women who run the clinics, these profit-driven clinics? Why do they do this? You have to ask yourself those questions, and then try to create these flesh and blood characters. And it's just a process. It's sort of, you've got to, as much as you're focusing on these real life situations and real life characters, you have to start trying to distance yourself and give it a kind of much more creative life through the stages that you kind of gradually work through. So yeah, and creativity is an amazing thing, as we all know, and you just got to trust in the process and trust that it takes you to that place. So yeah, that's what it was like with Made in India.
And what made you interested in doing a play specifically about commercial surrogacy in India?
So the reason why I chose surrogacy was, it was funny because I think I was in rehearsals on a different project, and I wanted to apply for something called the Adopt a Playwright scheme. And I realized, because I was lost in rehearsals, the Adopt a Playwright scheme had a deadline for the next day. And I literally came back from rehearsals and I thought, I really want to submit to this, because it basically gave writers like me, emerging writers like me, who didn't have the financial means to sort of spend time on a play, it just gave us sort of money and time to focus on an idea. And so I had to come up with an idea, and I was like, oh my god, what am I going to write about? And so it was like frantic online research, okay, documentary researcher skills in rapid motion. And I put together this idea, I put together this application, because I came across this article about commercial surrogacy, and it was a newspaper article, and it was about an English white middle-class woman who had hired an Indian village woman to be her surrogate. And it was the most shocking and outrageously written piece, because the English woman described the Indian woman as her vessel. And I just remember thinking, that could be like any one of my Indian female relatives in India. And in fact, it could be someone like me if my parents had not chosen to take that path of migration to Britain. It could be me. A vessel, like to be reduced from a woman to a vessel. And there was such a clash of conflicting kind of cultures and politics and emotions that I just felt I have to write a play about this. I have to write a play that just explores why these women have ended up in this sort of very explosive, combustible situation together. That was one of the reasons. And the other reason was because I also grew up at a time when, you know, assisted reproductive technologies were first really introduced in the world. So test tube babies, you know, all the Frankenstein kind of horror stories around test tube babies and IVF. And in our community specifically, because there's such a massive taboo around infertility, there were a lot of cases of altruistic egg donation between women. And altruistic as in there was no payment. Women did this out of generosity for one another, generosity and solidarity for one another. And it was one of the most beautiful things that I came across, you know, growing up, that one woman could do this for another woman. So when I came across commercial surrogacy and the fact that suddenly strangers and payments are involved, for me, it just felt like, what is this thing? Like, I want to know more about, you know, it's potentially just a really messy financial and emotional transaction between women now that money is involved. And I think that was, you know, having come from that sort of background and having witnessed women who were infertile having children because of other women, just through this beautiful act of helping each other out, you know, I think that really stayed with me and made me want to write this piece in particular. And then I ended up getting the Adopt a Playwright Award that year and beginning to develop Made in India. So it worked, the crazy last minute deadline. Totally, yeah. Because it is a compelling combination of characters. I didn't come up with it. It's a real world situation.
Did you do any like further research into that specific article you had read, or from there did they sort of transfer into the characters you created?
Oh no, I did a lot of research. I'm always like, no, I need to throw a long time at research. And I did a lot of online research, and ideally I would have wanted to have actually gone to a fertility clinic. But within the year that I had to start developing the piece, I couldn't actually do that. And also it would have been problematic, I think, to have got access to those places. And I only know that because I ended up sort of getting in touch with a couple of academics who had done a lot of research with the women at those clinics, and it had taken them a long time to gain access. So I did a lot of sort of comparative notes with them about their experiences with the surrogates and their experiences with the clinic owners. So it was almost like secondhand. It was like a secondhand experience for an experience that would have taken me a lot of time to have set up, to gain the trust and confidence of clinics that, you know, would they have given me access? Would they not have given me access? So I did a lot of that too. I watched a lot of documentaries. There's a lot of work out there around, you know, these issues. I mean, surrogacy goes back to Hindu mythology, Greek mythology, the Bible. You know, there's so many instances historically of it. So it's not like one is short of material or sort of research to figure out how can I like give flesh and blood to these people. But there was also another really interesting thing that I did, and I ended up going to these surrogacy conferences. And the surrogacy conferences were really interesting because, you know, there are a lot of companies out there who try to attract women, you know, who are not suffering, it's not a disease, but who are infertile, and you pay to go to these conferences, and they basically sell you these packages of what is permissible and what is possible. And I ended up coming across a lot of women who were looking for surrogates and having conversations with them under the guise of being a woman like that, I never lied outright, but I had conversations with them. And what I was so struck by was the single-minded drive and determination of these women to have children. And I've never, I don't have children. I'm in my 40s now. I don't have children. I helped to bring up my 2 nieces. I have many nieces and nephews who I love and adore, but I've never felt a biological impulse to have my own children. So it was so interesting for me to be with these women for whom it was almost like bordering on the cultish. That this was it was kind of obsessive, but I understand why it was obsessive. I do get why it was obsessive. So that was a big part of the research as well, having conversations with these women who did not really think about the fact about who these surrogates were. It was pretty much about them, their end result, that they wanted to have a child, and they were going to pursue any means to have that child. So it was really interesting because it threw up that whole issue of ethics and morality that really surround this issue of commercial surrogacy. So yeah, that was a big part of my research as well.
That's amazing, the breadth of research. I was, in reading it, wasn't sure if you had done more of that sort of secondary research or the primary research. So from all angles is really amazing. Can you talk a little bit about the production of it that was done in the UK?
Yeah, so the production was actually picked up by the artistic director of the Marcia was actually, before he was artistic director, was one of the people on the panel of the Adopted Playwright Award, and ended up becoming the artistic director of the Marcia at the end of the year that I finished as the Adopted Playwright, and then took the play with him. So the Marcia were incredible, they were wonderful, and we ended up, there was the director, Katie Posner, and 3 incredible actresses. And it was, for me, just so brilliant to work on this all-female piece. So much female energy is just coursing through, female creative energy just coursing through this project. And it was brilliant, and it was so well received over the UK. We toured around the UK, we toured around Scotland, and I think we sold out 2 weeks at Soho Theatre in London as well. We had a lot of sold out performances. And for me, as a diverse writer in England, that was so affirming, that we had a diverse audience that was turning up to see this work. Because this is the work that is usually seen as risky, as marginal, as irrelevant. And it's, and it is for those audiences that British theatre, I'm sorry to say, it has not really been focused on drawing in the past. And we got those audiences, and the conversations that I would have sort of, after the production, it was just so refreshing that people just really connected with where this material was coming from, if they were Gujarati or Indian or women, or it was just affirming for me, because theatre is not an easy medium to work in. And it really just gave me a lot of confidence to keep going and to keep telling these stories, and realizing there's a real audience out there for this kind of work. So yeah, an incredibly positive experience. And it was a beautiful production, really kind of minimalist, and yeah, an amazing set. I think they really did a tremendous job, and really elevated the script in terms of a holistic whole, and bringing all those different elements together. It was much more than I sort of envisaged from my script.
Amazing. Talking a little bit about production, I wanted to ask a question of Priyanka. So this script, of course, is written for in-person performance. It's written for a set. It's written with these evocative transitions built into it. And, as the director, you're tasked in these circumstances of shifting this to a virtual format, which I think, you did so beautifully, and working really, really kind of smoothly hand in hand with our film editor, Michael Long, who has done the whole series. But I was wondering if you talk a little bit about sort of your vision for this reading, and and interpreting this piece for a virtual format?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I read the script, I so badly wanted to be directing the actual production of it that I decided to do whatever I can to make the virtual reading as close to an actual, because, you know, I was looking at the transitions between the scenes, and there was so much information there, and it was so crucial in the way one scene flowed into the other that I didn't want to compromise on any part of it. And also because we'd gotten so lucky with landing a great cast and having a great team at Inishnuel. And I remember, Claire, when you told me Michael Long, who is the editor for this project, is ambitious. So I said, great, I'm ambitious too. Let's do the most. I was thrilled to hear that. So I came up with this vision or a plan to keep it as true to how it was originally intended to be performed, and give the audience as much of you know, experience of watching the play as possible, even though it was a reading. And I'm so grateful for the entire team and the cast for jumping right in and rising to the occasion and just doing whatever it took. So a lot of our process, because we had 5 hours to rehearse and then 5 hours to film it. So it really, because I come from an acting background, I know what it's like when a director has a very set vision and all you have to do is align. And sometimes your own understanding and interpretation of the script doesn't have much to do with how it's finally done. So I didn't want that for this. So it's so funny. One of you said, oh, Priyanka, you're an actor's director. I love that term. I want to be more of that. So a lot of our conversations revolved around how each of these actors interpreted their roles and tying that together in the time that we had. We'd have these conversations about, why do you think, you know, she did this? Or well, what is going through Eva's mind when, you know, in this process? And why does Aditi say or do this? And we had these great conversations that ended up, I think, building an ensemble even in a virtual environment. And that chemistry, I was watching the reading last night, and it really reads, even though it's a virtual reading and you're looking at the script and saying the lines. So I think it was a good combination of planning ahead and things magically falling into place, and a really, really powerful and beautifully written script.
I think planning ahead is so key on these really short turnaround readings, and especially when you add in the technical element and the fact that folks are doing this all from home, it definitely goes a long way. I did want to talk a little bit about the transitions, just because, you know, the scenes themselves exist in a relatively naturalistic world, and then there are these very like beautiful, evocative, heightened transitions. And obviously, Satinder, if you have anything you want to add into this, or Madison was the person who was reading those, and they have a description of some sort of like projections or visuals with them. So how you sort of made those work, and if Satinder, you want to talk about why those transitions were built in that way. Who wants to start?
Okay.
Why don't you go for it?
Okay. Well, like I said, you know, the translations had so much information in them, and they were so visual. And I understood the limitations of this being a virtual reading, that sure, we can't, you know, probably bring someone on board like a designer to make all of those, you know, images of the fetus and all of that. But I still thought that I kind of started seeing the stage directions as another character. You know, who is allowing the audience go deeper into the world rather than pull them out of it. So a lot of the conversations with Madison were, okay, if you imagine this person as a character, this is what we want the audience to experience. And, you know, we try it out, and she was really a one-shot wonder in terms of getting it. And, you know, recording with her was so easy, rehearsing with her was such a joy. But yeah, we treated the stage directions as another character in this. And I also, you know, some of you don't know this, but the politicians' voiceovers. So 10 years ago, I was in a street play in India with someone, and this one actor played the role of a politician so well, and he would just improvise these lines and dialogues. And when I started reading the politicians' election rally speeches, I just couldn't get his voice out of my head. But I wasn't in touch with him. It's been 10 years. I had no idea where he is. And I remembered his last name, so I looked him up and I found him on LinkedIn. And I got in touch with him and said, listen, I really need you to record these voiceovers for us, because that's another character in the play, Tucker, who we don't see, but the political situation and how that plays out has such an impact on how it's affecting their lives too. And it's also someone, Tucker is someone that Dr. Gupta and Aditi and Eva really talk about a lot. So yeah, even down to that detail, I thought it was important to incorporate and think of these people, even though we don't see them, as real characters who have a role to play in this.
I think especially in this format of like Zoom theater of recording at home, and then the transitions are so beautifully written, but they also give us a sense of the passing of time, right? Which is like a touch point that we all, like a growing womb and growing babies, like that's such a timeline that we have a touch point for. So I think that was especially important, especially in this format, to help convey the growing babies and the story of the baby too.
That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah.
No, I absolutely, yeah, I mean, you're both absolutely correct, Madison and Priyanka. And the transitions, I think it was definitely about just trying to use those in-between moments to give a sense of time and the growth of the baby. So almost like going from the womb to the bigger world outside, and from, and having the surrogate as the kind of the medium of that, it's sort of, it was going from inside her to outside her in a way, and going from the growth of the baby to the politics that is happening around her, because it's not just about giving birth and motherhood. It's also about her as a woman with political agency, and how is that agency exercised? Like, what are her reproductive choices? What are her reproductive freedoms? But still trying to capture the biological sort of aspect of what surrogacy and motherhood entail. And so, I couldn't, there was almost like not enough space in the script itself. It was like, I've got to use the transitions as well to, to sort of glue all of that together, because it's surrogacy is so hugely complex, and there are all these different sort of competing, conflicting aspects of it. And yeah, that it really just gave space to explore that and give each of those things a life of their own, biologically and politically.
I think that's a really interesting idea too, because with the passage of time in the show, right, you see Aditi looking more pregnant, and as in a full production, and as an audience member, right, like there's that suspension of disbelief, like, I just saw this person 3 seconds ago and they were only 3 months pregnant, and now they're 6 months pregnant. I know that's not real, but to like create, like, to spend some time with the pregnancy in these visuals and in these transitions helps make it feel more real than just simply seeing like a growing bump, essentially. So I guess that actually brings me to a question I had for anyone involved, which is that we've touched a little bit on the fact that A, this is a story about women, and B, this is a story about pregnancy, infertility, fertility, surrogacy, and all of these issues that are, I think, really present in a lot of people's lives, but not always discussed in a forefront kind of way. And I think that's part of why we wanted to do this reading series as a whole, because there are so many individuals and couples and families who are behind closed doors dealing with these things, but we're not necessarily seeing it in the art that's being created or even in the media. And I was just interested, as people who, were embedded in this project in a way that I wasn't, what are your thoughts or experiences on that? And anyone can chime in.
Well, I will say one thing, that when I came across Satinder's script several years ago, and I actually spoke with an artistic director in Philadelphia, and I was like, I love this script. This is so relevant. You know, you don't even have to put me in it, but I think it's a really important topic. And at that time, I actually had a close friend who was going through this struggle of wanting to have a child and couldn't, and then was struggling with her identity, and she was Indian, and it was heartbreaking. You know, I am a mother, but I became a mother, I guess, later in life comparatively to when my parents and grandparents had children. I mean, it's relatively kind of, I mean, I was 36, so I kind of still feel young at that point, but with my family, it's like, oh, you're ready to die. Like, I mean, you don't have children, what's happening to you? You know, you're not a success. And so it's that pressure. And I feel like when I read this script, I felt that pressure. But I felt the pressure from each character and understood each character's pressure, because I also come from a family of medical doctors, and their idea of pregnancy and this scientific, like they almost like take out the emotion. And I remember when I wasn't thinking about having children, but my parents would tell me the scientific reason of why I need to have children. And then there's this, you know, sociological reason. And I was like, you know, there is this emotion here. It's an emotional journey, not just scientific, but yet in this play, there is all these journeys, all the conversations, all of the tensions that each character has. And I was just so drawn by that. So my point was, when I mentioned this to someone in the theater community, I think what was stopping them from actually feeling the same was more, well, are people going to come to see this immigrant play? You know, like, I don't know if we have the audience. And I feel, and I don't know if any of you have ever had this, but that has been the struggle that I've had as a performer, an Indian performer, person, a woman of color, woman, you know, having that struggle and feeling, no, it is relevant, whether it's Indian or not, it is a relevant story. And I feel people will be so intrigued, interested, and also invested in this story. So I'm just so happy with the outcome of this particular reading and the response that we've been getting, because I was like, yes, I always knew this. And so, you know, Satinder, thank you for writing it, and for Inishnya to really believe in this story.
Yeah. Thanks. Anyone else want to chime in?
I was it's so great to hear about your process, because after feeling it manifest, particularly your ability to craft characters who sit in different relations to the issues, and to feel that each has a chance. You know, it's like we couldn't easily vilify anyone, and we couldn't easily see anyone as kind of perfect. And that complexity, especially dealing with, you know, digging into female characters, is just like, just so pleasurable. I loved what you were saying earlier about encounters with women who have this kind of singularity of focus. I think that there is in narratives around motherhood, there's like a simplicity, which is maybe, I don't know, related to Christianity. I don't know, I'm speaking from my cultural background. There's a purity of purpose in wanting to give birth. And this story shows how impure that impulse can get, right? That there are so many layers and levels of power and privilege in this story, and so many different kinds of abuse woven into the pursuit of something that is generally perceived as faultless.
That's interesting you touch on that, Suli, too, because there's this sort of religious undercurrent through the whole thing, right? Both from the name of the clinic and then also the moment where Eva is quoting the Hail Mary, right? And that there's this, I mean, you touched on this too, Satinder, right? Like the idea of surrogacy goes back for millennia, and so does this expectation of what motherhood and femininity and fertility is, and that provides an additional layer of pressure on these women, not just the biological, but the cultural and the religious as well. And I think that's a real, again, a really real testament to the beauty of this writing. Yeah. Did anyone else want to chime in on the last question? Or so I had so many more questions I wanted to ask you all, but we've ended up with this like really beautiful in-depth conversation. And I really, really appreciate everything you all are sharing. And again, like, can't say enough about the reading, the end product, the performances, the play writing, all of it. But I do want to open things up to our audience for their questions. And we've got 2 so far, if anyone else wants to chime in. So the first question is, how common is the surrogacy practice in India, and is it now illegal? So I don't know, Satinder, if you're able to answer that, or if Priyanka, I know you and Anna had done some research on this. So yeah, Satinder, if you want to stir it out.
So as far as I know, the latest, so Priyanka, maybe you know better than me and much more up to date, is there is a surrogacy bill that has tried to be pushed through the Indian Parliament for a few years now, and I think there's a 2020 version now, and it is about altruistic surrogacy being limited to, I think it's altruistic surrogacy limited to married couples and single women who are widows and divorcees, but foreigners, single people, and LGBT communities are not permitted to engage in the process of surrogacy. And I think they're just waiting for a sign off on this. Mm-hmm. And that's as far as I know, but it's been rumbling on. I mean, I sort of conceived this play many years ago, and it's funny because when I started writing it, I was writing a completely different version of the play. And then India decided that they wanted to ban surrogacy. And I think I was so close to finishing at that point. And then I just had to upend everything and think, well, actually, this is really interesting because it is a political, it's a political issue. And bring that into the play. And actually what it did was really to heighten the stakes with the characters and the story. And so I just had to rewrite everything. But I think since that time, it's still not it's not a done deal. But it is very much also a bill that is reinforcing a nationalistic right-wing agenda in India. And it's very much about how that particular government sees what a traditional family is. And I don't think that really chimes with the sort of new families that we have seen sort of blossom all around the world that, you know, really kind of represent the best of diversity, the diversity of the human race. But Priyanka, please, because you have done the most recent research on it, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I think you covered all of it, actually. We do know that around 2015, 2014, 2015 is when the ban came in place. So it's been illegal since for foreigners to come into India. And but it was interesting to think of how the whole Mother India, and how even Dr. Gupta says, sacrifice yourself, you know, how idealistic we make. And that does seem like a little bit of nationalism, you know, seeping into this, and how people are sort of exploited in the name of that bigger purpose. But at the same time, yes, I do agree that, you know, how politics and how their idea of what a family should be plays into the scenario. And what I also loved about how this aspect is captured is that you don't know where your moral compass points, that the play leaves you questioning, do I think it's wrong for, you know, or is it okay to make it possible, you know, for a person who can't have children, you know, if India can do that for them. But then at the same time, so many people are being exploited in the name of, you know, surrogacy. So I love that it leaves us with questions, and there's no clear antagonist. But there are antagonistic forces, and each of these characters are so deeply flawed themselves, but at the same time you find yourself rooting for them. So I think that was so beautifully crafted, Satinder.
If I know that there's a little bit more information about this on the dramaturgy website that Anna created, and
Yes.
Jess did post that in the chat. So I think it basically says the same content you did, Satinder, about what the rules are and the laws are now, but also gives a little bit more context on like the financial differences and the legal differences between surrogacy in the UK versus India. So if anyone is interested, that link is in the chat, and I really recommend you check it out, because you know the play is so rich with all of this information that, you know, there's a lot to sort of feed that if you have more questions. So I recommend folks at home to check that out. We've got a bunch of questions. So the next one is there a reason why you did not have any of the men in the story on stage, Satinder?
Because I just love writing about women and writing for women, and I think men have had their day. I'm kidding. Yeah, it is about keeping the focus on women and women's stories and their voices. I think that men can be peripheral in these stories, so that we are getting it from a perspective that is purely a female, yeah, just a female sort of view on the world and experience. And I think when you bring men into that, it's sort of, you're sort of diluting that a little bit. And I think we are at a point in our sort of creative history where we should be telling these stories from an exclusively female viewpoint, because they haven't previously been told enough. We've heard, you know, male perspectives on so many stories, and so I don't feel guilty about it. I'm doing it like because I desperately want to. You know, there's another play that I'm writing right now. Again, the men are the offstage characters, and also because I just think the relationships between women are so incredibly fascinating, whatever sort of context that you put them in. For example, like I've recently, one of the amazing lockdown things that I saw was My Brilliant Friend, which it's the adaptation of the Elena Ferrante novel, and it's about two female best friends, and it's about that. And I think Made in India, similarly, it's about not shying away from the positive kind of joys of what female relationships are, but not shying away from the ugly sides too. And I think that was so important for me in this play. And there were so many people who were like, oh, you know, the characters are not so likable, and, you know, Eva's not likable, and why have you made her in that way? And I just think, because these are real life characters in a way. These are the way women are made. We are complex creatures. We are complex, and we are contradictory, and we are layered, and it's about art conveying all of that. And I think to focus exclusively on women allows us to go in depth with that without being distracted by the usual kind of male masculine viewpoint that, you know, we have been conditioned into seeing the world. You know, it's time to shift the focus. It is time to shift the focus, and so I do it gladly and enjoy and guilt-free.
I don't think anyone here would guilt you for it.
No, I know. Yeah.
I think your use of the word likable, or like the characters being unlikable, I think is so key. I feel like that is a standard that would not be exacted on male characters. And yes, all the nods. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I
Yeah.
I had an opportunity. I was in London in the summer of 2017, and I saw a play about surrogacy and like through India, and there was a male character, there was a husband character, and I thought it really diluted the story. I walked away and thought, I don't think I liked how all of that worked out. I think especially in that instance, the male perspective like heightened like hysterical tendencies in the women on stage, and I was like, I am not interested in this story. And so I read this play and I thought, wow, I wish I had seen this production. Yeah, I think the absence of male characters allows for the nuance to exist in the female perspective. So.
And I don't think they've been left out. I did feel the strong presence of three men: Tom, Manish, and Tucker. So it was very much there. But then the story, yes, needed to focus on these three characters. And yes, their perspectives were part of it, or who they were are sort of woven into it. But then our focus is on what these three women are going through. So I love that.
Yeah. I'd like to add to what we were just talking about around like how the same values will not be imposed on male characters. I think partly it is also because society has created this expectation of women to be pious, to be nice, to be flexible and compromising and sacrificing. And why shouldn't we have it all? Why shouldn't we be complex characters with everything? Like, I remember being in a patriarchal community from a very young age, being told how a woman should never get angry. A woman should not laugh too loudly or shouldn't show her teeth. You should always keep your eyes down. And I think because of that, then any strong woman with any strong desires and wishes wanting to go that extra mile to get what she wants in life is just not likable. And I think that's where a lot of that criticism might even be coming from. And so I am so happy for once to have a script where we're not game to ask for what we want.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That, yeah, these characters aren't worried about that. Like, they're focused on what they need. They know what they want, and maybe because they're in a room with other women, they're not worried about letting that kind of motivation or ambition show. Absolutely. We have two more questions. This question is, so the question is, and I'm going to add to it, why is it that in the end, Dr. Gupta decides to allow Eva to be free of the debt she owed for the services of the clinic she provided? And then I had a second question personally, which is maybe again, a question for Dipti or Priyanka or Satinder, of what do we think that final moment of the play is? So first, Dr. Gupta, and then Aditi at the end. So who wants to dive in? Maybe Satinder, since you wrote it?
This is terrible, but I don't remember. I just don't know. I'm like, why did she let her off? That's awful.
It's very nice.
So maybe Eva and Dr. Gupta could shed light on this. I think Dr. Gupta was pushed to such a point of exhaustion through the whole process that actually it was about just kind of cleansing her hands of the whole thing. That it's almost like it would have been tainted money, because she's been through, all the women have been through as much as they have been through, and in a way to put a monetary sum on that process would just have muddied the waters even more. I think she maintains a kind of moral high ground as well, by doing what she does, letting this one go in a way, even though perhaps at the beginning, you know, she would have been hell-bent on Eva being accountable and squaring that debt, you know. And I think there's so much about, because I've written the piece, you know, it's about colonialism, it's about neoliberalism as well, and it is about that process of, you know, so much damage is done, and at what point can the healing begin? If you just kind of you know, perpetuate the same process over and over and over. And I think there's something of that in it as well, that it's about her own sort of coming to terms with how brutal this particular process has been. And, you know, she just wants to be done with it. Take your baby, go. You know, you've put us kind of through enough, and I'm washing my hands of this. I mean, I think that's why I wrote it. So if anyone else can please jump in and
we did have that conversation about how colonization sort of also, because Dr. Gupta has a line. She says, "Oh, you just wear these bangles and henna, and you do yoga, and you think you understand us." And there is a line where she says, "It's about time that you started paying up." And for me, that was a strong reference to being colonized by the British, where you've taken enough, you know. But I think that's what's beautiful about each of these characters, and especially Dr. Gupta's transformation, is that at one point she decides to take the moral high ground. You know, there are redeeming qualities, especially when she comforts Aditi and says it's okay after she loses one of the twins. And I think this is another point where we see that it's not just another transaction for her. There is something, you know, human in Dr. Gupta too. But yeah, maybe Rupal and Suli can shed more light on this moment.
Well, I remember when I first read that, I actually did think it was odd. I was like, why did they do that? You know, it was definitely like, I think I would have wanted to get paid for all of this. You know, that was the initial instinct, but then reading it with the other actors and understanding this, it was so great that you really couldn't tell who's the bad guy. Is there a bad guy? Is there a bad guy, or is this just a bad situation that we're just trying to, you know, make light of? And so at the end of that conversation that we all had as a team, I realized, I was like, oh, this is actually a really great moment, that it does confuse it even more. And that was very thrilling for me as the actor playing Dr. Gupta, that, okay, yeah, now I understand that complexity of this particular situation. And I did feel I was conscious of, I know when I usually play doctors, or I see my mom, who's also a physician, she is very transactional. There is a compartmentalization between emotion and what needs to be done, because that's what she needs to do. And I think also her being a female doctor makes her feel even more the necessity to be that way. Like, I can't show my emotion because then that shows that I'm weak. But in this case, maybe we were talking about how it's all the women and the men, the men aren't on stage. So in this sense, that could be another reason why it's like, you know what, I understand, you know, I am a human here, and I feel everyone's pain. And at that point of just like letting go, and yeah, you know, being a part of the healing, as you stated. So I actually really love that sort of circle of that character.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering too if we could touch on the very final moment of the play. I don't know, I actually overheard you all talking a little bit about it on one of your rehearsals, so I know there was some discussion, but Aditi, if you had any thoughts on that final moment.
Yeah, to me, Aditi coming back, I could just summarize in one word. It just was the ultimate defeat of a human. To me, that's how it read. Like, this woman who was so disturbed by everything that went down, you know, with her limited understanding of science, and for her to realize that there was a dead man's sperm in her body, not really getting it really, like how, you know, but, and then having gone through what she did, that interaction with Dr. Gupta, and then to come back in the state that she's described, asking to be a surrogate again, was just ultimate defeat. Okay. That's how it went. And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
And the failure of the system to support her.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with Dipti. I was watching the reading with my husband last night, and he said, speaking of Aditi's character, she's the one who's lost the most. And I kind of agree with him because at the end of the day, and there's this beautiful conversation, I think trimester 1, scene 2 or 3 between Eva and Aditi, where we're talking about my body, my choice. And Aditi says, I know how to choose. I don't have a choice. And Eva sort of brushes past. You don't mention that at the rally, but it made me really think, come to think of it, she does not have a choice in this because her hands are, I mean, her arms are twisted into doing this, and it's a vicious circle and there's no out. Now that, you know, Aditi's gone through this process and knows how painful it can be and knows what, you know, the dark sides of this process are, she still can't step out of it. She still has to keep going back. So it was powerful. Initially, when I read it, I thought, oh, it should have ended at that moment where Dr. Gupta says, Namaste, Tom. Why did, you know, Satinder choose to have this? But now I'm totally convinced that that needs to be the ending, because we need to know that the circle doesn't end. It just keeps going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with you, Priyanka, very early on, and that was like the first thing we talked about. It's like the final play. And it ties into that element too that they talk about, right? Like, you can put all the laws you want on this, people will still find a way to make this happen, no matter what the rules are. We're just past an hour, so I do want to wrap things up. We have an additional question, but I think what I'll do is email that to you, Satinder, after, if you wouldn't mind, just because I don't want to keep everyone much longer. One thing I did want to share is that as part of this reading, we've been encouraging our audience to contribute to a nonprofit based in India that works with women around infant mortality and helping them in the first few years of and maternal mortality, sorry, and then helping women with young children in the first few years of their life sort of transition into a healthy and safe parenthood. And it's called Arman, A-R-M-M-A-N. I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, but the website is, Jess will share that with you all. And we really encourage you to learn a little bit more about them. And I think one of the beauties of, you know, creating theater is getting to shine a light on stories and then remembering that there are people and organizations and amazing individuals out there putting this work into action. So thank you all so much for joining us. This has been such a beautiful process and opportunity to talk about this play, and I'm incredibly grateful for all of you making this reading work in these crazy parameters in a very tight amount of time, and to Satinder for letting us do this play in this crazy format. So thank you all so very much, and thanks to everyone at home for joining us. Have a great afternoon.